Hello. This is the lecture for A Reasonable Use of the Unreasonable by Flannery O'Connor. This is an essay that was published in 1969. It is a very interesting, piece of writing of Flannery O'Connor basically explaining some of her concepts and ideas about how she was constructing and using various methods to get the, example and result that she wanted in her reader in her, short story writing. So this is a very interesting article. It was very foundational. You see a lot of people, still reacting essentially to this concept, and we see echoes of this, in literature and writing that's being, published this year. So it has, very much influenced the way that a lot of writers approach. So what I'm going to do to help you understand this selection that you've read is I'm going to go through some of the key elements that I would like you to be underlining in your own writing, in your own reading of it. And I'm also going to, then give a little bit of a summary of the real pullways and takeaways that we should be drawing from this and kind of using to think about and interpret other writing that you're going to read later in the semester, because this Flannery O'Connor selection you can use to then interpret short stories that you read later. And it's a good way to also think about what various authors are doing. So if we're looking at, and you can see that I've got my annotated copy right over here, a reasonable use of the unreasonable. If we're looking over at that first page, one of the things that O'Connor is doing is she was using one of her own short stories, a very famous one, not the one that we've read in this class, to really go through and give an example. Because obviously, Flannery O'Connor was, when she was working, she did use violence. She did use like bad things happening and shocking things happening and very, unpleasant things happening, people being surprised and shocked, and in some cases left in very bad situations. In this case, an entire family was murdered, is the, one of her classics. But she's talking, there was a lot of pushback that Flannery O'Connor got as an author, with people basically saying, O'Connor, what in God's name are you writing about? Why are people acting like this? Because she would write like bad things happen. Like in one of her very famous stories, a young man and a woman go up to a hayloft to have sex, and the man ends up stealing the woman's wooden leg and running off with it. And the woman's left stuck in the hayloft. And a lot of people would read this and say, O'Connor, what are you trying to tell us about human nature and how people behave? Because no one seems to get punished for the terrible things they do in your story. The people who do the bad things and kill whole families down to the baby and the cat, or run off with ladies' wooden legs, or slap people, or are racist, or all these things. No one really seems to get any element of comeuppance. There's no, lesson. And what O'Connor is basically saying in this is like, no, you're missing the point of why I use violence and what I'm writing about. So elements that I want you to very much pay attention to in this. So for example, we're on this first page. Here we have, O'Connor. Much of my fiction takes its character from a reasonable use of the unreasonable. And that's, a beautifully O'Connor way of putting it. Lovely turn of phrase on that one. And I'm skipping to, as you can see, second page. I've got a lot of things, annotated. We're going to go down on that, second page. I often ask myself what makes a story work and what makes it hold up as a story. And I've decided that it's probably some action, some gesture of a character that is unlike any other in the story, one which indicates where the real heart of the story lies. This would have to be an action or gesture that is both totally right and totally unexpected. It would have to be one that is both in character and beyond character. It would have to suggest both the world and eternity. I'm skipping over her divine life thing, but that is also a very interesting insight to O'Connor's, reasoning, not what we're going to be, making as much use of. So I'm skipping out of this now and back over. I suppose the reasons for the use of so much violence in modern fiction will differ with each writer who uses it. But in my own stories, I have found that violence is strangely capable of returning my characters to reality and preparing them to accept their moments of grace. Skipping all the way down. We hear many complaints about the prevalence of violence in modern fiction. and has always assumed that this violence is a bad thing and meant to be an end in itself. With the serious writer, violence is never an end in itself. It is the extreme situation that best reveals what we are essentially. And I believe there are times when writers are more interested in what we are essentially than in the tenor of our daily lives. Violence is a force which can be used for good or evil, and among other things taken by it is the kingdom of heaven. But regardless of what can be taken by it, the man in the violent situation reveals those qualities least dispensable in his personality, those qualities which are all he has to take into eternity with him. Now, I'm going to go back and really emphasize that one sentence for you again, because there's the key of how we're going to be looking at violence when we look at it in an O'Connor lens. It is the extreme situation that best reveals what we are essentially. Essentially, O'Connor is an author who's saying, like, she's not going to be interested in writing about a regular day in a regular life with regular occurrences. She wants something that is extreme, that is out of the norm, that in that moment of violence, in high tension, in something happening, the truth or essential nature of this character is revealed. And so for O'Connor, that's what kind of that great fiction is doing. Good fiction, good writing is doing. It's showing us something true, something essential about these characters that could never have been revealed in their day-to-day lives. So if we're kind of looking at that, we can kind of think that about this and keep it in mind going forward and looking at the other stories that we are going to be looking at and applying to different ideas. All right. So that was A Reasonable Use of the Unreasonable by Flannery O'Connor.